There is a photograph that you have probably seen before, even if you do not remember where. A young woman standing in front of a wall of microphones. Her face is swollen from crying. Her husband is standing next to her, one hand on her shoulder, the other pressed against his own mouth, as if he is holding something inside that will break him if it gets out. Behind them, the flags of the state of South Carolina and the United States of America. In front of them, a country, and on her lips, a sentence that the entire country will repeat for the next 9 days. Please, bring my babies home. Her name is Susan Smith. She is 23 years old. She has 2 sons. Michael is 3. Alexander is 14 months. The country believes her. The country searches for the man she has described. A black man in a dark knit cap. A carjacker. A stranger. A monster who forced her out of her own car at a red light in rural South Carolina and drove away with her children still strapped into the back seat. For 9 days, America does not sleep. Volunteers comb the woods of Union County. Psychics call in. Tips pour into every sheriff's office from California to Maine. The President of the United States comments on the case. The photograph of Michael and Alexander, 2 small boys with bright eyes and round cheeks, is pinned to the doors of grocery stores and taped to the windows of gas stations and flashed on the national news every hour on the hour. I am Miles Ghost Hunter, and tonight I'm going to walk you through 9 days of national grief that were built on a single, calculated lie. I'm going to show you the traffic light that should never have been red. I'm going to take you into the room where a small-town sheriff looked across a table at a weeping mother and understood, with a slow and terrible certainty, that she was not a victim. I am going to stand with you at the edge of a dark lake, in the middle of the night, while divers find the thing that she has been hiding from the world. And I'm going to sit with you in a southern courtroom, where 12 people tried to answer a question that the state of South Carolina had never answered before. What do you do with a mother who destroys her own children? The children, by the way, were exactly where she left them. She knew it every single hour of those 9 days. Every interview, every prayer, every microphone, every tear. She knew. Let us go back to the beginning. Union County, South Carolina. Population around 30,000. A place of red dirt roads and pine forests and textile mills that have been closing, one by one, for 2 decades. The kind of town where everybody knows everybody, where the sheriff eats breakfast at the same diner every morning, where a funeral is attended by half the county because half the county is somehow related. In the autumn of 1994, Union is a town that has not had a story like this in living memory. It is about to have one that will never leave. The mother at the center of everything is a young woman named Susan Vaughn Smith. She grew up here. Her maiden name was Vaughn. Her father, Harry Vaughn, took his own life when Susan was 6 years old. 6. A small girl, standing in a kitchen, trying to understand why the man who was supposed to hold the whole world up had decided he could not hold it for one more day. Her mother remarried. Her stepfather, a prominent local businessman named Beverly Russell, entered her life. Years later in court, testimony will emerge about what that stepfather did to Susan when she was a teenager. I am not going to rehearse those details here. I will only say that by the time she was a young woman, Susan Smith had already survived things that would have broken most people in half. She married young. She married a man named David Smith, a stock clerk at the local Winn-Dixie grocery store. By the time she was 23, she had 2 children by him. The marriage was already failing. David had been unfaithful. Susan had been unfaithful. The household was held together by paychecks and baby schedules and the slow, grinding routine of a marriage that nobody wanted anymore, but nobody had the courage to end cleanly. And in the middle of that collapse, Susan Smith began an affair with a man who, in Union County terms, might as well have been a prince. His name was Tom Findley. He was the son of the owner of Conso Products, the largest employer in town. He was wealthy, handsome, and unattached. For a young woman from a broken family, working a secretarial job, trapped in a marriage she no longer wanted, he was every door she had ever wanted opened. For about 6 months, he opened some of them. And then, on October 18th, 1994, he wrote her a letter. The letter was polite. It was careful. It said, in effect, that he enjoyed her company, but that he was not prepared to be a father to 2 small children who were not his own. That he was not ready for the life that came attached to her. That the relationship, as a romantic possibility, had run its course. He ended it with kindness. He did not understand what he had just handed her. 7 days later, on the evening of October 25th, 1994, Susan Smith drove her 1990 Mazda Protégé through the streets of Union with her 2 sons buckled into the back seat. Michael, 3 years old, was in a child seat on the passenger side behind her. Alexander, 14 months old, was in an infant carrier behind the driver's seat. It was just after 9 o'clock at night. She was driving out into the countryside, on a narrow road called Highway 49, through fields and patches of dark pine woods. And about 9 miles outside of town, she turned off onto a dirt road that led down to a boat ramp on a small man-made reservoir called John D. Long Lake. At approximately 9:15 that night, she got out of her Mazda. The engine was running. Both of her children were asleep in the back. She released the handbrake, closed the driver's door, and stepped back onto the gravel. And she watched her own car roll down the boat ramp, slowly at first, then faster, and then plunge into the black water of the lake. It took 6 minutes for the car to fully submerge, 6 minutes during which Michael and Alexander were still alive inside it. Alive and strapped into their seats and unable to reach the windows or the doors or their mother, who stood on the bank and watched. That detail is not speculation. That detail is established fact from the forensic reconstruction, from the physical evidence, from her own later confession. 6 minutes. We are going to come back to those 6 minutes. For now, I am only going to tell you that by approximately 9:21, on the night of October 25th, 1994, Michael Daniel Smith, age 3, and Alexander Tyler Smith, age 14 months, were dead at the bottom of John D. Long Lake. Their mother turned and ran up the dirt road in the dark. She ran almost a mile, along the side of the highway, until she reached a house at the intersection of Highway 49 and a smaller country road. She pounded on the door. A family named the McLeod family was inside. Shirley McLeod opened her door at about 9:25. Standing on her porch was a young woman in a jogging outfit, hysterical, breathless, crying so hard she could barely speak. And between the sobs, the sentence that would travel the country within 24 hours. "He's got my kids. Please, God, he's got my kids. He's got my kids and he's got my car." The McLeods called the Union County Sheriff's Office. Within minutes, the first patrol car was at the intersection, and within hours, Susan Smith was sitting in the office of Sheriff Howard Wells, telling him the story that she had constructed in her head during that long run down the highway in the dark. She told him that she had been driving, alone with her boys, that she had stopped at the red light at the intersection of Highway 49 and Monarch Mills Road, that while she was stopped, a black man in a dark knit cap had opened her passenger door, put what felt like a gun to her side, and told her to drive. That she had driven a few miles down the road, that he had forced her out of the car at this very intersection, that she had begged him to let her take her babies, that he had told her, quote, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, to, underscore, underscore, and driven away with Michael and Alexander still in the back seat. Sheriff Howard Wells listened. He took notes. He asked the right questions in the right order. He put out an immediate alert. Within an hour, every patrol car in a 6-county radius was looking for a 1990 burgundy Mazda Protégé with a black male driver and 2 small white children inside. By morning, the description was national. By noon, the FBI was involved. By evening, the face of Susan Smith and the faces of her 2 sons were on every television in the United States of America, and the country, as one, began to search. It is hard to describe now, more than 3 decades later, what those 9 days felt like. This was before the internet was woven into every hour of every life. This was the age of the evening news, of local newspapers, of neighbors gathering in living rooms to watch press conferences. The Smith case became one of the first true crime stories to travel at the speed of the 24-hour cable news cycle. CNN ran updates every hour. The major networks sent reporters and satellite trucks to Union. The town filled up with cameras. Volunteers drove in from other states. Churches opened their doors around the clock for prayer vigils. And at the center of it all, again and again, was Susan Smith. She stood at the press conferences. She gave the interviews. She made the appeal on national television for the return of her children. Her husband, David Smith, stood beside her. They held hands. They cried. She begged the man who had taken her babies, the man she had invented out of thin air, to bring them home safe. America watched her face, and America believed her. Almost everyone believed her. Almost. Sheriff Howard Wells was 51 years old in October of 1994. He had been sheriff of Union County for just a few years. Before that, he had been a deputy, a detective, a man who had worked his way up through every role the department offered. He knew the county. He knew the roads. He knew, in particular, the intersection of Highway 49 and Monarch Mills Road. And from the first hours of Susan Smith's statement, something at that intersection did not make sense to him. Susan said that she had been stopped at a red light. She said a carjacker had climbed into her car while she was waiting for the light to change. But Howard Wells knew that particular traffic signal. He knew how it worked. That intersection in 1994 used a sensor-based traffic light. The signal on Highway 49, the road Susan was driving, did not turn red unless a vehicle was waiting on the cross street at Monarch Mills Road. No vehicle on the cross street, no red light. It was a simple piece of traffic engineering that anyone who had driven that intersection 100 times in their career would know. On the night of October 25th, at 9:15 on a quiet weekday evening, there was no other vehicle on Monarch Mills Road at that intersection. None. The sensor had not been triggered. The light had not, in fact, been red. For Susan Smith to have been sitting at a red light, alone on Highway 49, with her engine running and a carjacker climbing into her car, another vehicle had to have been waiting on the cross street at exactly that moment. Another driver who would also have witnessed the carjacking. Another driver who would have called it in. Another driver who did not exist, because nobody, anywhere, reported having been at that intersection that night. It is the kind of small, quiet inconsistency that most of the world would never notice. A sensor-triggered traffic light, a detail of local infrastructure. But Howard Wells noticed. And once he noticed it, he could not unnotice it. Now, a competent sheriff does not accuse a grieving mother of lying on the basis of a traffic signal. What a competent sheriff does, and what Howard Wells did, is keep the detail to himself, keep Susan Smith talking, keep the search alive, and wait. Wait for the next inconsistency. Wait for the next small piece of the story that does not fit. And watch. So the search went on. Dogs combed the woods. Helicopters flew over the lakes and rivers of Union County. Divers went into several bodies of water in the area, looking for a burgundy Mazda that might have been dumped, including, at one point early in the investigation, John D. Long Lake itself. The divers went out onto the lake. They made a pass. They did not find a car. The water was murky. The lake was small but surprisingly deep in places. And they moved on to the next location on the list. It is one of the bitter details of this case. They were there. They were at the right lake, and they left. Meanwhile, Susan Smith kept talking, and the more she talked, the more Howard Wells began to hear things that did not fit. She described the carjacker in detail one day, and differently the next. She said he was wearing gloves, then said he wasn't. She said his voice was deep, then said it was soft. She said he had pointed a gun at her, then said she had only felt something hard against her side. Small things, not the kind of inconsistencies a prosecutor can hang a case on. The kind of inconsistencies that tell a veteran investigator that the person he is talking to is not remembering a real event, but editing a story. And then there were the emotions. This part is delicate because trauma affects people in different ways, and grief does not come with a single, correct performance. But experienced investigators, the ones who have sat across from hundreds of people in the worst hours of their lives, develop a kind of instinct, and Susan Smith's grief, to Howard Wells and to the FBI agents working with him, did not feel quite right. It would come on cue for the cameras. It would vanish during the long hours in the sheriff's office, replaced by a flat, almost bored expression. It would return when she was asked about her children and leave again when she was asked about the carjacker. On the third day of the investigation, Susan Smith agreed to take a polygraph examination. The results were, in the polite language of law enforcement, inconclusive. In the less polite language, she failed the questions about the carjacker. She was asked, in effect, whether she knew where her children were. The needle moved. It did not move in the direction of a woman telling the truth. Howard Wells now had two things. He had a traffic light that could not have been read, and he had a polygraph that could not be ignored. He still did not move on her publicly. He kept the search running. He kept her close. He brought her in for more interviews, each one a little longer, a little more detailed, a little more carefully structured, and he watched the story start to bend under its own weight. Day 4, Day 5, Day 6. The country was still searching. The tips were still pouring in. Every day, somewhere in America, a black man in a knit cap was being reported as a possible suspect. Innocent men were being pulled over. Innocent men were being questioned. A racial panic was building in Union County and beyond. In a town of 30,000 people, there was one version of this story that was allowed to be told, and it was the version of the stranger, the intruder, the outsider who had destroyed an American family. Day 7, Day 8. On Day 9, the morning of November 3rd, 1994, Sheriff Howard Wells brought Susan Smith into his office for what he told her was going to be another routine interview. He sat down across from her. He closed the door, and he began, slowly and methodically, to dismantle her story in front of her. He did not shout, he did not accuse, he simply laid the pieces on the table. The traffic light that could not have been read, the witnesses on Monarch Mills Road who had not existed, the inconsistencies in her descriptions of the carjacker, the small contradictions in her timeline. He laid them out, one by one, the way a man lays out playing cards. And then he told her, quietly, that he did not believe her, and he asked her to tell him what had really happened. There are different accounts of exactly how the confession came out of her. What is established is that at some point during that interview on the morning of November 3rd, 1994, Susan Smith stopped performing. The grief, the sobs, the carefully constructed story of the black carjacker, all of it fell away, and in its place came a written confession. 2 handwritten pages. In them, she admitted that there had been no carjacker, that she had driven her own car to John D. Long Lake, that she had released the handbrake, that she had let the car roll into the water with her children inside, that Michael and Alexander had been at the bottom of that lake for the entire 9 days that the country had been searching for them. The confession ended with a sentence that has haunted this case ever since. Sheriff Howard Wells read the pages. He folded them. He arrested her. And then he picked up the phone and called the divers. John D. Long Lake is not a large body of water. In a boat, you can cross it in minutes. But the lake has a feature that makes a sunken vehicle particularly hard to find. The bottom, near the boat ramp, drops away steeply into deeper water, and the water in 1994 was extremely murky, full of silt and decaying vegetation. Visibility underwater was almost zero. On the earlier search, the divers had made passes, but without a precise location, they had been searching blind. This time, they knew exactly where to look. A team of divers went into the water in the afternoon of November 3rd. Within a short time, one of them felt something in the dark. A tire, then a fender, then a door. The Mazda was upside down, resting on its roof, about 122 feet from the boat ramp, in roughly 18 feet of water. And inside the car, still strapped into their seats, were the bodies of Michael and Alexander Smith. The divers who brought them up were experienced men. Several of them, in later interviews, spoke about that recovery as something that never left them. One of them said that when he saw the small hand of the older boy pressed against the window, he had to surface because he could not make himself continue. The recovery took most of the afternoon. When the car was finally winched out of the water, with the bodies still inside, a crowd had gathered along the banks of the lake. When the news spread through the crowd, some people fell to their knees. Some people walked away in silence. Some people began to scream. That evening, Sheriff Howard Wells stood in front of the cameras that had been covering the search for 9 days. He was a man who had been holding a terrible piece of information inside his chest for several hours. And he told the country, in a few short sentences, that Michael and Alexander Smith had been found, that they had been in the lake the whole time, that their mother had been arrested and charged with their murders, and that the black man in the knit cap did not exist, had never existed, had been, from the first moment, a fiction. The reaction, in Union and across the country, was something that is hard to describe to anyone who did not live through it. A grief that was already enormous became something uglier. The town of Union had spent 9 days praying for a child that had already been dead for 9 days. The country had spent 9 days searching for a stranger who had never been there. And the racial dimension of what Susan Smith had done, inventing a black attacker to cover the murder of 2 white children in the American South, in a region with the history that the American South has, cannot be ignored. It will not be ignored later when her case goes to court. David Smith, the father of the boys, was told in a private room at the sheriff's office before the press conference. The agent who told him has since described it as the worst thing he ever had to do in his career. David Smith collapsed. He was a young man, 24 years old, who had just been told that his 2 sons had been murdered by his own wife, while he had been standing next to her in front of national television, begging for their return. 6 months later, in July of 1995, the state of South Carolina versus Susan Vaughn Smith began in the Union County Courthouse. The question in front of the jury was not, in any serious sense, whether Susan Smith had killed her children. That was no longer in dispute. The question was whether she should be sentenced to death. The prosecutor was a man named Thomas Pope, Tommy Pope, a solicitor in his 30s, ambitious, sharp, the kind of trial lawyer who walks into a courtroom with his case laid out in his head like a chessboard. Pope's position was direct. Susan Smith, he argued, had not killed her children in a moment of madness. She had killed them because they were, in her mind, an obstacle to a new life, an obstacle to a wealthy lover who did not want children, an obstacle to the person she wanted to become. This was not a mother who snapped. This was a young woman who had made a cold decision and carried it out with calm, with planning, with a 9-day national performance designed to keep herself above suspicion. That, Pope argued, was the profile of someone who should be executed. The defense attorney was a man named David Bruck. Bruck was one of the most respected capital defense lawyers in the South, a man who had spent his career defending clients on death row. His position was not that Susan Smith was innocent. His position was that Susan Smith was not a calculating murderer. She was, he argued, the final casualty of a life that had been broken in pieces before she was ever old enough to understand it. The father who took his own life when she was 6. The stepfather who abused her as a teenager. The suicide attempts in her own history, plural, going back into her adolescence. The failing marriage, the rejected love affair, the untreated depression. A woman, Bruck argued, who had not woken up that morning planning to kill her children. A woman who had driven to that boat ramp in the dark with the intention of ending her own life along with theirs, and who, at the last moment, had gotten out of the car and been unable to get back in. That last detail, whether Susan Smith had originally intended to die with her children, became the single most contested point in the trial. The prosecution argued that she had never intended it, that the plan had always been to let the children drown and blame a stranger. The defense argued that she had intended to die and had lost her nerve. Testimony from psychologists came in on both sides. Testimony about her stepfather came in. Beverly Russell himself gave a statement in which he accepted responsibility for part of what had happened to her. It was an extraordinary moment in the courtroom, and it changed the temperature of the case in a way that was hard to measure. The jury deliberated for 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours for the fate of a woman who had drowned her own children in a lake. They returned a verdict of guilty. And in the sentencing phase that followed, they chose, by a vote that was not unanimous in the way the state would have needed for execution, to sentence her to life in prison rather than to death. The foreman of the jury said afterward that they had not been able to agree that she was the worst of the worst. They had not been able to agree that she deserved to die. And so, they had sent her instead to the South Carolina Department of Corrections for the rest of her natural life, with no possibility of parole for 30 years. 30 years. In July of 1995, that seemed, to almost everyone in that courtroom, like the same thing as forever. But 30 years is not forever. In November of 2024, Susan Smith, now in her 50s, came up for her first parole hearing. The hearing was held in Columbia, South Carolina. David Smith, the father of the 2 boys she killed, traveled to that hearing. He sat in a room and he spoke, in front of the parole board, about his sons, about what she had done to them, about what she had done to him, about the 30 years he had spent as the father of 2 small ghosts. The parole board listened. They heard from her lawyer. They heard from her. And they voted, unanimously, to deny her parole. She will be eligible to apply again in 2 years, and then 2 years after that, and then 2 years after that, for the rest of her life. Union, South Carolina is still a small town. The textile mills have mostly closed. The population has not grown. The traffic light at the intersection of Highway 49 and Monarch Mills Road, the light that was never red on the night of October 25, 1994, has been replaced and upgraded and replaced again in the decades since. But the boat ramp at John D. Long Lake is still there. So is the lake. A small memorial was placed near the ramp some years ago, a stone with the names of Michael Daniel Smith and Alexander Tyler Smith, the ages at which they died, and a single word: remembered. David Smith has remarried. He has other children now. He has, by every account, tried to build a life in the long shadow of the one that was taken from him. He does not often speak publicly about his first wife. When he does, he uses a phrase that recurs in almost every interview. He says that he does not believe she ever truly understood what she did, that he is not sure she is capable of understanding it. I want to go back for a moment to the 6 minutes at the boat ramp. The Mazda, from the moment Susan Smith released the handbrake to the moment it was fully submerged, took approximately 6 minutes to sink. 6 minutes in which Michael, the older boy, was almost certainly awake. 3-year-old children are not heavy sleepers in moving cars. When the car hit the water, when the cold came in around the doors, when the light from the bank above grew distant and then disappeared, he was in the back seat with his baby brother, strapped in, with his mother somewhere he could not see, for 6 minutes. Susan Smith stood on the bank during those 6 minutes. She watched. She has said in the years since different things about what she was thinking, that she wanted to save them, that she tried to go into the water, that she ran to get help. None of the physical evidence supports any version of the story in which she tried to save her children. What the evidence supports is a woman who stood on a gravel boat ramp in the dark, watched her car sink, and then turned and ran a mile down a country road to tell a story she had been rehearsing in her head for days. That is the case. That is what the traffic light exposed. That is what Sheriff Howard Wells understood, across a table, on a morning in November of 1994. And that is the question that this case leaves behind. The one I think the jury was really wrestling with in those 2.5 hours of deliberation. Not whether Susan Smith killed her children. Everyone in that room knew she had. The question was whether what she did can be understood at all, whether there is a word in English or in any language that correctly names a mother who stands on the bank of a lake and watches her own children drown, and then gets on television and begs a stranger to return them. The jury could not find a word for that. I do not think I can either. If you want to understand how far someone can travel from the person they were born to be, you can look at a photograph of Susan Vaughn at 6 years old, a little girl in South Carolina whose father had just killed himself. And you can look at a photograph of Susan Smith at 23, standing at a wall of microphones with her husband's hand on her shoulder, lying to a country about her own children. Somewhere between those two photographs is every decision, every failure, every untreated wound, every moment of abuse, every choice made and not made by her and by the people around her that produced the night of October 25th, 1994. I am not telling you that any of it excuses what she did. I am telling you that it does not excuse what she did. I am telling you only that the distance between those two photographs is the distance every human being contains if the wrong things happen to them in the wrong order, at the wrong time, and no one stops any of it. In the next episode of this series, we are going to travel from Union, South Carolina in the autumn of 1994 to Eustis, Florida in the autumn of 1996. 2 years apart, a few hundred miles apart, a different story, but one that rhymes with this one in some ways that will become clear as we go. We are going to meet a 16-year-old boy named Rod Ferrell who believed, literally believed, that he was a 500-year-old vampire named Visago. And we are going to follow him from a small town in Kentucky, across 2 states, into a quiet suburban house in Florida, where a man and a woman were spending an ordinary evening. And we are going to try to understand how a group of teenagers in the 90s convinced themselves that drinking blood and hunting humans was the life they were meant to live. Episode 8. The Vampire Clan of Eustis. Until then, I am Miles Ghost Hunter. Remember the names: Michael Daniel Smith, Alexander Tyler Smith, 2 small boys in a dark car at the bottom of a lake in South Carolina. And the traffic light that, by being exactly what it was, a piece of quiet, sensor-driven machinery in a town nobody was watching, told the truth when nobody else could. Good night.